Hello and welcome to our podcast, Everyday People, Extraordinary Performance. My name is Abigail Wilson and I'm Natalie Byrne. And today we're really excited to speak to Paula Paterson. Paula is Solutions Director at FidesOak, a culture transformation consultancy. And Paula's got over 25 years of experience in learning and development in both private and public sector. So really interesting background. So welcome to the podcast, Paula.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, first off, I know obviously I've just been mentioning 25 years of experience. So can you give us a bit of a background of yourself? Where's your career at, especially leadership? I know there's quite a lot in leadership in that. So tell us a bit more about your background.
Well, I've got quite an interesting career history. So, are you ready for this?
Oh gosh, yes.
Buckle in. Buckle in. So, I left school in 1986 at 17 years old. And when you left school at 17 years old in 1986, you did one of two things. You were a hairdresser or you worked in an office. And I ended up working in an office. So I was an office junior for a while, didn't like it. I'd wanted to go to art college, never did. So I studied to become a beauty therapist. I'm actually a qualified beauty therapist. I've got City and Guilds. And that was probably where my career started at that point, because people used to come in for treatments in a very private space and would literally tell me anything. And I'm thinking, I could actually be doing this for a living. Why don't I do psychology? So I left beauty therapy at the age of 26, 27 and decided to take myself off to university. And that was really where it all started. So I studied psychology and sociology and gender studies, interestingly, at university with the intent of doing a degree in psychology, but didn't. After 2 years, I thought sociology is more for me.
Right.
Because it's more focused on culture and behaviour, where psychology is more focused on the person and what goes on within them. Did that, was very, very fortunate and got a job before I graduated with House of Fraser's head office. So as soon as I graduated, I moved south. And that was the start of my career in learning and development. It was my first learning and development job. So that was 25 years ago. 24 actually, nearly 25, because I graduated in 2000. And from then, it's just been onwards and upwards. So I started as a training advisor, worked in retail, went into public sector for a period of time, and then found myself in high hazard industries, which is where I've stayed. So that was 15 years ago. And it's a very interesting work to do because I've always enjoyed learning and development. It gives you a reason for getting out of bed because you are genuinely helping people do better in their work, because you spend out 8 hours a day in work, if not longer. So it's a big chunk of your day. And then I came into high hazard and particularly behavioural safety. And it was actually about making sure people got home in the same way that they arrived. So it became very meaningful at that point. Yeah. And that was the start really of my rise into leadership, I suppose. I started as a training advisor, moved into a training manager. And then in 2019, myself and my two business partners decided to start FidesOak, and that's when I became a director. So FidesOak was started 3 months before the first lockdown, which was an interesting period. And it was literally a survive or die period because we had to work out how to deliver our services in a world where we weren't allowed to leave our house. So it all got very interesting for that couple of years, but we were very fortunate because we worked in high hazard. We were actually allowed to travel, but we travelled with letters, actual physical letters in our cars and in our bags and things like that, to give us permission to travel because we were working with what was classed as essential organisations. I don't know if you remember at the time, there were key workers and essential workers. And oil and gas, which is who we were working with at the time, were classed as essentials. So were we. So yes, so it's been a bit of a ride for sure.
The journey.
Decided to go into education probably a bit later in life. Had to work very, very hard at what I've done. None of it was easy. Didn't particularly have a career path. I wasn't looking to be a director. I wasn't looking particularly to be a manager. I just had people who believed in me and thought they should try me out and see if I could deliver. And they did. And I did, I guess. Um, yeah, so that's how I ended up in the role that I'm in now.
Oh,
So it's been a journey.
yeah. I mean, obviously, I know a little bit about yourself as well, but I think especially from the leadership perspective, and life changes, you have life changes within your lifetime. And I know that we've been speaking about this before, you are at the point now where you have a senior role, you've got some major responsibilities within a business, and then life potentially throws something else at you. And that is something called
Yeah.
the menopause.
Isn't it just? And
Isn't
did
it
you
just?
know that October is the Menopause Awareness Month? So there you
Well,
go. We're right in
little bird
amongst it.
told me, but yes.
I know. So yeah, it was actually about the same time as we started FidesOak, that I started to have some really quite challenging symptoms, but didn't know properly what they were or what was causing them, because my whole life, everyone had always said to me, oh, well, it's all about hot flushes, and you see women fanning themselves. And my mum, I used to go shopping with my mum on a Sunday morning to do the grocery shop at Asda. And she used to put herself near a freezer because she was having a hot flush. So that was my experience of it, and didn't have any of those. So I couldn't attribute symptoms to anything. Until I saw the Davina McCall program, which was around that time. I was in a hotel in Hull. I thought, I'll watch this because, I was 52 at this point, 51, 52. And she's reeling off the symptoms, and it's symptoms I'd never heard of before, thinking, I've got that. I've got that. That's me. Oh my God. You know what I mean? It's actually perimenopausal. It's not menopausal. So,
And I think that's
difference
something the difference, because I think that's something that I haven't come across before, really. And, I'm not quite there yet, but again, only knowing from what your mum sort of told you, Inez, that the hot flushes, or what the prejudice is of this is what menopause is. So I think there's more education probably around it now, but I didn't know about those two phases at all. So do tell us a bit more about that.
You want to know about that?
Oh, yes.
So perimenopause. Yeah, I bet you can't wait. Perimenopause is the build up towards menopause, and it lasts about 8-10 years. It's a long time. Menopause itself is actually very quick, because menopause is defined by your period stopping. So once your period stops, and I think it has to be for 12 months, that's it. That's menopause. So that's actually a really, really short period. It's the perimenopause that people talk about, I think. But they talk about it as if that is menopause, but it isn't, not yet, and that's where I'm moving into the next phase. I'm actually moving into menopause now. But yeah, around 52, I started to get these really difficult symptoms. And it was probably at the worst time as well, because we just started FidesOak. I was the owner or part owner of the company. I was a director for the first time as well. So I had these huge responsibilities, decisions to make. We're a consultancy, so I was with clients all the time. I was speaking to clients all the time. And I was starting to get really quite concerned that I wasn't going to be able to do it. And I don't think that this is an unusual experience when you start to read some of the literature, because there are a lot of women who reach this point in their careers, because this is probably when you are at your most successful, because you've gone through that journey, who are either finding work very, very difficult to do, or just leave. They just stop working because they can't work anymore. And I think the numbers are really quite high, which is worrying. It's really worrying that people are struggling to do their work and attend their workplace because of this. So yeah, that was kind of my experience. I actually started to question, am I able to do this? But I didn't understand the symptoms properly. So around that time, my uncle, who's my dad's brother, had just died of CJD. So most people know that as mad cow disease, although his wasn't beef related, it was actually spontaneous. And that's actually a very, very quick deterioration. Well, his was, for sure. So within about the space of 2 months, it was like having dementia on steroids. The deterioration was so fast. And he lived in Hull. I live in Scotland. And I saw him every weekend, and every weekend he deteriorated more. So it was actually quite a harrowing thing to watch. He died in the January, February time. So it was just before the first lockdown. And it was just as COVID was starting to break properly. And my dad was diagnosed just afterwards with dementia. So they're brothers. So one of the symptoms that I was experiencing, which was one of the most challenging ones, was memory problems. I was really, really having issues remembering things. And I have brain fog. They call it brain fog. And it's kind of like your head's full of fog. It's like it's full of cotton wool. And there are loads of threads in there, and you're trying to get hold of them and pull them all together, but you're not able to get a hold of them properly or see them fully, you know. So this was a couple of symptoms that I was experiencing quite early on, and it made me question whether I might have either what my uncle had just died of or what my dad had just been diagnosed with. Yeah. And I had an early onset of dementia. It was so severe. And that's really, really quite distressing if you're self-diagnosing and not really appreciating or understanding what these symptoms are. And my family's a disaster, by the way, because we also have osteoporosis in my family. So the women on both sides, have some real issues around osteoporosis. So I'd started lifting weights. I'd started doing resistance training to help maintain bone density. Mm-hmm. And found my joints were really starting to hurt. So my hip and knee joints were getting so painful that I had to stop. I just had to stop all exercise. So again, not really understanding what these symptoms were, I attributed that to arthritis. And I just thought, right, okay, so I've got dementia and I've got arthritis. And at the time I was 52 years old and not feeling 52 years old particularly. Well. And there were other symptoms. I mean, the earlier ones were, it was like having a hangover. I had like a constant headache. It was just always there. Mm. And feelings of nausea were just kind of hanging around all the time. It's just like you'd had a couple of wines the night before, but it was always there. And I hadn't, And then sleeping became a real issue. And I'd always been a 10-hour a night kind of girl. I really enjoyed my bed, really enjoyed sleep, and then found I couldn't get to sleep at all. Mm. So it would be, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and then I'd be awake at 2 in the morning, and I'd stay awake. I couldn't get back to sleep. So I'd just have to get up and watch really bad TV at 2 o'clock in the morning, drinking cups of tea in the dark on my own. And the heating wasn't on, so it was cold as well, So it was a pretty miserable time of the day.
It's very isolating that time of night.
It's actually a really, really lonely time of the night. So I got all of this kicking around, and then I guess there was some mental well-being stuff that started to make an appearance, because that all felt quite physical, and perhaps a bit, it was cognitive as well. My brain just didn't feel like it was working very well. But I started to really properly suffer from anxiety. But it was coming from, I think, self-doubt. This self-doubt started to creep in, and it's, can I do this job? And what if my memory fails me? What if I'm sat in front of a client and I can't speak? I can't find the words that I need to find, or I can't answer the questions. And you start to question your ability to be able to do things. And it becomes a bit of a spiral. So you're not getting enough sleep. So the anxiety's ramping up. I'm getting anxious about not being able to sleep. Then the self-doubt starts creeping in, and it really eats at your confidence. And it really starts to make you hear people talking about they lose themselves. They kind of they don't remember who they are anymore. And it's kind of like that. You kind of get lost in all of this. And you're trying to remember the time. I can think back to a time where my brain was lightning quick. It was really sharp. I was quick. I could think on my feet. I had a lot of knowledge and information kind of inside my head that I could access, and all of a sudden I couldn't. And I didn't understand why I wasn't able to do it. So it was really quite a distressing period until the Davina McCall program. And then I phoned the GP. And it was at a time you couldn't get a GP appointment. You could only speak to them on the phone. So everything was done by phone. None of it was done face-to-face at the time. But it got resolved. But quite interestingly, my age was a real factor in the conversation, where you must be perimenopausal because you are 52. But
Oh.
actually, if you look at a lot of people's experiences, it can be much younger.
Mhm.
And I think probably I was experiencing some of the symptoms much, much younger, but because there were no hot flushes, hadn't fully appreciated what they were until I got hit with them all in one go at about 52.
Yeah. And then at a time where you are almost like the really height of your career in a really senior leadership position. And I think that must be what's happening to a lot of women in general.
Yeah.
And is that maybe also a factor of why there is maybe less women in leadership positions? Could that be a factor? Because people, as you were mentioning before the article, that there's women do decide to just leave work. Could that be a contributing factor? I mean, it's scary to think that it could be that, especially when, it's just something that actually can be done within a work environment, within an organization, to help and support women that go through that kind of phase, because you are now, I believe, in a very good position with your menopause, and you work through it. So
yeah. And I think the question that you ask is a really interesting one that, without doing a lot of research, I would be challenged to answer. However, I can offer an opinion.
Yes.
It's likely one of the contributing factors. If women are leaving work, they're just not in those positions. So it's likely to be a contributing factor. Logic kind of tells you that. I think there are other contributing factors as well about how work gets set up, and the hours that we expect people to work, and all of this kind of stuff. And there are things that perhaps go way, way back that we won't get into in this podcast necessarily, because it's not menopause related necessarily, but there is, women still are the ones that give birth. Women are still regarded as primary caregivers on the whole. That is a huge generalization. So there are other factors that contribute, but I don't see that wouldn't be one of them, for sure. And I think possibly one of the tragedies, I guess, around that is around the diversity conversation. And without having women in senior leadership positions within a workforce, there's an opportunity being missed to have that difference of thinking, that difference of approach, those different experiences that contribute to an organization, and that influences and molds the culture of that organization, because there are different perspectives that contribute, and that's one of them, and that's being lost. So, and it doesn't have to be. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be. Particularly if women feel at that point that they have no choice anymore, because they don't feel able to work because their symptoms are just making it too difficult. And I think that's hugely unfortunate.
And especially when nowadays, I do think as well, there's a bit more awareness about menopause in general, like me kind of coming across it a bit more and understanding it. So I do think there's more about it, talked about it. But then also, I do know there's also a lot of misdiagnosis, or just kind of brushing it off, or having that prejudice of, oh, it's just hot flushes. So how was it for you? How was that kind of journey for you in terms of actually getting a good diagnosis, and then ultimately also treatment for it?
That at the time felt really, really difficult. And I don't know if COVID had been a contributor. So, that kind of does have to come into the mix as well. But prior to that, probably in my mid to late 40s, I was already having what I would regard as hormonal challenges, because probably for about 2 weeks of every month, and you could almost set your watch to it. You know what I mean? I could see this coming if I put it onto a calendar. I would go into a very low mood, to the point where, without wishing to sound dramatic, I was having suicidal thoughts. But because it was cyclical, there was a rationale in my own head that said, you're not depressed. This is hormone related. It has to be, because it's tying into when you're having a period. It was 2 weeks before I was having a period. And this was kind of mid to late 40s. So I went to a GP about it on more than one occasion and said, I'm having these symptoms. And it really was getting desperate because I was feeling suicidal. And I was prescribed antidepressants, fluoxetine first, which didn't agree with me, and then sertraline. And I stayed on that probably for about 4 or 5 years. But you have to keep going back. You don't just get a supply. You have to keep going back and having conversation. And I did question on a couple of occasions, could this be the start of menopause? Because I didn't know then about perimenopause and menopause. For me, it was just all menopause. And I always got asked 2 questions. Are you still having periods, regular periods? Are you having hot flushes? And it's like, yes, I am still having regular periods. And no, I'm not having hot flushes. And those 2 questions seem to satisfy, it can't be perimenopausal or it can't be menopause because you're not answering the questions in the right way. And I did ask those questions on a couple of occasions. I was asked those questions, on a couple of occasions. So I stayed on antidepressants for quite a long time. And it was actually during the first lockdown, because I lost my routine. I started to forget, memory loss, started to forget to take my antidepressants and started to feel better, weirdly. So even though I had these really, really weird symptoms, my thinking sharpened up a little bit. So the antidepressant had in some way contributed, I think, to me not being able to think as, I didn't have the agility. It impacted that, and people had noticed that when I kind of came off them. And I was pleased to come off them because I wasn't depressed. I didn't feel like I needed them. I felt like I needed something else. So, and I think that's a lot of women's experience. They are diagnosed antidepressants quite quickly. I don't think I'm unusual in that. But when I did speak to the GP, we had a really, really good conversation. By the time I got to 52, we did have a really, really good conversation. But I also did quite a lot of research, and what I did notice is when you kind of go onto the internet, because everybody does, that's where you find stuff out, there's an awful lot of information there. But I don't know how much of it is accurate. I don't know how much of it is correct. And a lot of it's conflicting as well. So I actually found that I was reading a lot of things that weren't necessarily in agreement with each other. And that was a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a minefield to work your way through that. But I did have a conversation with the GP. The GP said, let's try you with HRT. Do you want to? Because there are other options. And I said, no, that is the option that I want to try. And there's lots of different ways of administering HRT. So you can have it as a patch, a tablet, a gel, a coil. All of these kind of are ways of administering HRT. So I went for a combined patch. So it has estrogen and progesterone both in the patch. Those are both the female hormones that you need. But it didn't agree with me, and it actually made me worse for a long time. The anxiety really ramped up. The sleeping issues really they were really, really bad at that point. And I just found myself at that time, 2:00 in the morning, just crying. I was just crying all night, and didn't seem to be able to not cry. But there was no reason for it. There was no personal reason for it or work reason for it. So I contacted the GP to say, I don't think these patches are agreeing with me. They're actually making me feel worse. And the GP said, just give it 3 months and see if it settles down. And so I agreed to give it 2 months. Well, I think 2 months in, 3 months, sorry. I think 2 months in, it was like, no. So I woke up at 2:00 one morning and just took the patch off. It was just intolerable. So I phoned them back and said, that's it, the patch is off. I'm not putting it back on. We need to try something different. So I'm on a different patch now. So I'm on a patch now that administers estrogen through my skin, but I take a tablet for progesterone, and that seems to agree with me a lot more. And over the period, I started on the lowest dose possible. I'm now on the highest dose, but it does get monitored. You phone, because your symptoms get worse again, and you recognise the symptoms as coming back. So you go back to the GP, and you tell them that the symptoms are getting worse, and they try you with the next dose up. So it's all incremental and it's all managed well. So I'm on the maximum dose, certainly for estrogen now, within the recommended limits. And I've found it within 2 weeks of being on the right HRT, nearly all the symptoms just disappeared within 2 weeks. It was so quick.
Mm.
And it was such a relief. It really was such a relief. I was able to go back to the gym. My thinking became more effective. I do still have some memory issues, but they're not nearly as bad. I do still have brain fog, but it's not nearly as bad. I sleep now. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning now, but I find I can go back to sleep, and I do. So I sleep quite well now. So yeah, that really, really worked for me once I was on the right HRT and having that managed well. But interestingly, all of my conversations have been on the phone.
Oh, still.
Still, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know if that's everybody else's experience, and I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. You know, it works. But yeah, I just find it interesting that it's important, but it's all being done by phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see a nurse. You have to have a blood pressure check once a year. So I see a nurse once a year. But yeah, so
Wow.
interesting. So for me, once it was got right, it made a massive difference. But it did take a couple of attempts.
Yeah. I think
And
that's
I mean,
really
that's-
interesting in terms of the fact that, yeah, there's light at the end of the tunnel for anyone that might be listening that is having some of these symptoms. But I think for me, listening to your experience of it, it just highlights the awareness piece, because if it hadn't been for the
Yes.
Davina McCall program, you maybe wouldn't have recognized some of that and maybe wouldn't have
Yeah.
reached out to your GP. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just, as I say, just the awareness is just so important, and speaking about it, because I think previously it's been a bit of a taboo subject, hasn't it? It's women things, we don't talk about them, but
No one wants to talk about women's things.
yeah. But I think,
In fact,
yeah,
I think
it's
I
just so
said period more than once in this podcast, and everyone's probably gone, because it's women's stuff. But it's important, and it's important for organizations to take that into account, because it's a big part of your workforce. It is a challenge for women, and you don't want to just not do anything, and you want to support them. You want to help them navigate that through. So what do you think organizations can do to actually help women in that position? Well, I think both of your questions and comments are really insightful. So I'll go back to Abby first, because it kind of leads me into what you want to talk about, Natalie. Awareness is so important. And if the Davina McCall program hadn't televised, I probably would have struggled to talk to my GP, if I ever talked to the GP about the symptoms. You know, I do think that awareness within the GP community has improved a lot. I really do. My conversations are certainly different to the conversations of maybe 8-10 years ago. But awareness is so important. And like I say, there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of books being written. There's a lot of websites. There's a lot of people that are selling products that claim to alleviate symptoms. I don't know how true some of these are. And it is a minefield. And I did a lot of reading. I did do a lot of research so I could inform my conversation with the people that I needed to have the conversation with, and the GP was one of those. But my friends are the same age as me, or similar. Sorry, I'm the oldest. So if my friends are watching this, I'm really sorry. But I've just lumped you into my age, and some of you aren't. But my friends are a similar age to me. And we all have different experiences. So perimenopause and menopause is very individual. You know, we all go through it. All of us women are going to go through it. But it's very individual. So I've got friends who are sailing through it like nothing's happening. I'm so jealous. I have a friend who doesn't want to use HRT. It doesn't work for her. You know, I think I might actually be the only one that does use HRT. There might be another one. And we talk about, in fact, there is another one, because we talk about these things. And we have a great group of people where we talk about our experiences and how we're treating these experiences and the experiences we're having, talking to the medical professionals about this and how to have these conversations. And you know, one of my friends said to me, because I was still having brain fog, and she said, "Have you tried testosterone?" I didn't know women could get testosterone or even should try to use testosterone. Did a bit of research. Yes, it is a female hormone. It exists in our bodies as well, and it can help with brain fog. So you can't get it on the NHS unless it's a libido issue. If I went to my GP and said, "I'm having brain fog, can I have testosterone, please?" I wouldn't be able to get it. So I get that privately. Everything else, my other prescriptions through the NHS, but testosterone is private. And it does make a difference. But I wouldn't have known about that if we'd not had this conversation, me and my friends, So awareness is so important, but it's about your own awareness as well. And in educating and informing yourself, it's your body, get to know what's going on. But then what it allowed me to do, to answer your question, Natalie, is have a conversation back into my organisation. Because it almost legitimised, it suddenly wasn't a women's issue anymore that nobody talks about. It's actually a legitimate issue that does need to be spoken about. And I was really, really fortunate. My business partners are both male. Just going to have to put that one out there. They are both male, but were very willing to listen and have. It's not accommodations have been made. That's not what's happened. But there is an understanding that there may be periods where I just don't function very well. And there's just an unsaid appreciation now of it's okay. We know what that is. And I don't have to go into this big explanation, So, in fact, it happened yesterday. And I'm going to say this, and I think there are going to be so many women out there that go, oh my God, that's me. I'll get halfway through a sentence and I can't remember the next word. It's so bizarre. And I was talking to somebody about this at work yesterday who I won't name. But we were talking about the simplest word that just gets lost. It's gone. And you understand the meaning of the word, but you can't actually find the word itself. So I was in a meeting yesterday and people can see me do it. I'll pause because I'm looking for the word. And sometimes I'll find it and it'll come to me. Sometimes it won't. And actually now my colleagues fill in the blanks, which is quite nice of them. Or I'll find that I'm talking around what the word means because I can't find the word itself. So it says longer to say anything. It's a bit convoluted. But people just have patience and they wait. And it's really, really simple things like that. That's one of the simple ones. But for me, my whole job is communicating. I communicate within FidesOak. I communicate with our clients. I communicate all the time. But communication, because my memory doesn't work very well or I have this brain fog, can become a really, really significant issue. And when it's not very good, and sleep contributes to that, when it's not very good, the anxiety starts because it's like, I'm about to go into a meeting. What if I get lost in the conversation and I can't find the word that I need to find? That's really embarrassing, So I think awareness, it is around talking. Talking is a big thing. So I think if we're going to raise awareness, we need to talk more. I think conversation is hugely important. And I think we need to keep having these conversations like this because it's not a women's issue. I mean, we said this more than once in this podcast, and everyone says that with a slightly hushed voice. But it's not women's issue, it's an everybody issue. So particularly in the workplace, if we're looking at women holding senior positions or we're looking into the diversity conversation, that becomes an everyone issue. And we all need to pile in and we need to make this work. And I am absolutely nailed on positive that our male counterparts out there really do want to be part of this conversation. They really do want to be part of that support. But we need to have the conversation to make that work. We can't not have this conversation. And I'm one of those people who will quite happily talk. I will quite happily offer an opinion, particularly if I feel like there's benefit in it, which is why I'm quite happy to talk about my menopause experience. For some women, that's not going to be easy. That is a real challenge because, my own experience of it, when the self-doubt's there, you actually start to wonder if you should be doing this job, if you actually deserve this role. That's what was going on with me. So how do I tell people that I'm not doing my job very well? That's really hard to do because that's saying to someone, I'm not effective anymore, or I'm less than the person that I should be in this role, or I'm not able to contribute anymore. That's really hard to do. So,
and I think that's
go
where
on.
also it's quite often for, as you say, the awareness piece. People probably don't, or especially male counterparts, they probably don't even know that this is potentially going on. They may have heard it. It might be obviously awareness of it, but not the deep awareness and the deep understanding that we have. Anyone now, probably at this point, even including yourself, we thought it was hot flushes and it's not. So it's having that deep understanding of it, the actual awareness of it. And it doesn't mean you can't talk about it. I think anyone can talk about it, but if you're not comfortable at talking about it, at least have the awareness so you know that, okay, this is potentially affecting my workforce. So I can put things in place to help to navigate that issue, because it's not going to last forever. You know, it is that dip in your cycle, that
It's
you
a
just have to
period
go
of
through.
time.
Yeah.
It's a period of time, and you have to go through it. And if you look at if you look at the statistics, what is it? Women make up 51% of the population. I think it's slightly more. So, you know, look at your workforce. It's a significant part of your workforce that are going to be having these experiences. And for a lot of women, and it did with me, there's the potential for it to really negatively impact how I was experiencing work, but how I was able to contribute as well. And work very much defines who I am. It gives me a sense of purpose. It's why I get out of bed in the morning. I spend a lot of my, you do, you spend a lot of time at work. I know that's not everybody, but it really does define who I am. And I really started to question that. It's like, where's my sense of purpose now? Where am I contributing? You know? But I think it's really unfair of us. It would have been really unfair of me to look at my colleagues and my peers with the expectation that they understood what was going on. I have my own responsibility to make a declaration in amongst that. But so they understand, you know. And I think you're right. It is about this really deep understanding, because I think we all have a kind of surface level understanding of, women are going to go through it and it's a bit of a change and it's a bit of a nightmare and they're going to get really angry and aggressive and all that kind of stuff, you know, and have hot flushes. But I think it is that much, much deeper understanding of it, and a deeper understanding, if they're willing to share it, of individual experiences of it, because it is a very individual thing. But you need to operate in an environment that is emotionally safe and allows you to be able to have that conversation. Because statistically still, I believe, women make up much, much smaller numbers in the senior leadership positions. So their counterparts and their peers will be male. And these are really difficult conversations to have. So I think there is an accountability certainly on me to share my experience, but we also need environments that make it safe to have these conversations, and perhaps looking at all of our peers and all of our workforce around their responsibility to make that conversation okay, and always giving that permission for that conversation to take place. And there are ways of doing that, I'm sure, that you can. Like, there's an awareness month this month, so make use of that, you know, and how can you open up the doors for these conversations to then take place? So yeah, I think it is getting better. I'd like to think my experience was a common one. I don't know the answer to that. People listening to this podcast will know what their own experiences of this is. But we absolutely need to keep having the conversation. It needs to continue, and it's not just for women who are a similar age to me. So we have a community of women who are sharing their experiences. There's a lot to be said for that, by the way. You know, I'm really lucky because my friends, we sit and have glasses of wine. We talk about menopause, and, you know, that is the topic of conversation right now. So there is something about us being able to share our experiences and realizing that you're not the only one. You know that there's a rational side of your head that says you aren't the only one. Can't be. But it feels like it sometimes, you know. So it's nice to be able to share that. But then, and I'm looking to you young ladies on the screen, there are young ladies like yourselves where it's not very far away. Sorry, might be, might not be. It is an inevitability, you know. It's not really something that you can escape. Who don't be scared of it. And I know that you're hearing my conversation and probably thinking, oh my God, is that my future? But the conversation will help because you will be better informed and you will have better awareness and you'll be better. I felt so unprepared for this. Yeah, you'll be better prepared. I really wasn't prepared for this. I knew it was coming. And I just thought, yeah, I can manage a hot flush. I can do that. That's okay. It was the rest of it. Yeah. That was the bit I was really unprepared for.
I think the thing that has really kind of impacted me is listening to yourself, because you have been very open with us, and thank you for that. But I think also alongside like the Davina program, up until that point, my genuine understanding was, as you've said, it's the hot flushes, it's the stopping of periods. And I had no idea what a time frame was for that. I honestly didn't really know anything about it. So I do think that myself and Natalie's generation will be much more prepared and will be a bit more like, right, okay, I've started noticing some bits. Maybe I need to go and have a conversation with a GP, where else that maybe would have taken longer. And obviously it is a lonely journey when you're thinking, I don't really know what's happening to me. So I think we're going to be much more prepared, as you're saying. So,
yeah. And the lack of knowledge for me, it does make it quite scary because you can attribute it to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
All sorts of things, and you start to self-diagnose, which is never good. But yeah, and I mean, HRT was my answer. And I know a lot of people are quite nervous around HRT. It's not always had the best press, but it works for me and I feel safe on it. But there are other options out there to be explored. Just explore what's available, try things out and see what works for you.
That's also part of the whole awareness piece. It's making yourself informed and not just yourself. And I think, as Abby was just saying as well, in for us and in our workplace, the awareness is there, the understanding is there, and people can help us navigate that a little bit more. And as you said, someone is finishing your sentences because, okay, I can tell there's menopause is happening, at this point in time, and they support you silently almost. Yes. And going through that and supporting that way. And that is about behavior. That is about having empathy and understanding for your colleagues and knowing, okay, there's something happening, so I'm going to step in to help. But we don't have to, you can talk about it, or we don't have to mention it there and then, oh, this is her menopause fog coming in. Just support them silently to navigate through that. And that's the environment that you need to create for your workforce, really. And I think we are lucky in being able to have that. But there will be other women who might not be, but hopefully time will change that a little bit more.
I hope so. And again, I just keep coming back to the whole need to talk about it. The more conversations that are being had, the more understanding it happens. You get more, see, there you go. That was a menopause moment. But, the more understanding there is within an organisation, but it needs to come from, I think, people's experiences, the real experiences of what this is like. And I am very fortunate. And now, it can be a bit of a joke now, which is quite nice. It's not a joke in a sinister way. But I've just said on this podcast, Christ, that was a menopause moment. And it was. I actually lost the word for a second, the next word that was coming. And I can say that in an open space now. Hang on a minute, I'm having a menopause moment, and I'm not thought any less for it. It's just a fact of my existence right now. So yeah. And I think more, I don't know what other organisations are like. There will be people out there that are perhaps not having the experience that I am. And it does need to be different. And I think we are moving in that direction because there is more and more and more conversation being had. More and more books are being written. There's more and more TV programs about it. But still, and there are a couple of things that kind of happened to me during that period. And again, probably COVID added a bit of a spin to this. I use a particular kind of patch. The patch sticks and the actual drug itself is in the stickiness. And it passes through your skin. Yeah. There are some out there on the market that just don't stick very well. So you're not getting the level that you need. So I use a particular one that kind of sticks well for me. At one point, you couldn't get them in the country. They were virtually impossible to get. And it's kind of this was where we were compared to this is where we are now. Yes, during COVID, it was very difficult to perhaps get these things in the country. But when I went into the pharmacy and said, why can't I get the patch that works for me? She called it the Davina effect because of the TV program, the demand had gone up significantly at that point. And they just couldn't meet demand. And it's like, but this, I don't want to medicalize the condition necessarily, but this is a condition that some people do need a medical intervention to help alleviate some of those symptoms. The supply just wasn't meeting the demand.
Well,
and for me, that was perhaps, and COVID had its part to play, but is that's an indication to me of where we were and where we need to get to. We do still need to kind of move forwards with this and recognize the impact of it to make all these things available that are necessary, whatever that is, counseling, HRT, whatever. We need the conversation. We need to progress in it.
And the conversation is important for workplace because, especially male counterparts, they might not know or understand. So if you don't know of something, you're not be able to help or create an environment to talk about it because you don't know about it.
You don't know about it.
No.
Yeah.
So you need to have this conversation and actually be open, even sometimes for women if it is uncomfortable. But if you feel like there's a psychological safe place to say it, then please do. And try and have those conversations and be the advocate for other women as well in your organization.
And that's where I think my role is important now. Because I am kind of passing through this, because I've got the HRT right now, I do feel in a much more comfortable space to be able to speak about it and speak about it in a way that makes sense and is sensible and, and it's not an emotional conversation necessarily anymore because it's not anxiety driven anymore. But I do feel I have a responsibility in my position to speak about it because it gives permission for other women to be able to speak about it within our organisation. Because I think there is something really important in leadership roles about making yourself vulnerable. Because if you make yourself vulnerable, and coming back to psychological safety, you're giving permission for other people to do the same. Because if people see me talking about it, and there's no negative consequences to having that conversation, then for them it's okay too, I hope, at least anyway. So I think for sure, if there are females out there and ones that are holding leadership positions and they do feel that they occupy space where they're able to, I certainly feel some responsibility of advocacy, of creating, not just speaking on behalf of other women because the experience is individual to everybody, but there is also speaking on behalf of other women to say, well, this is what the perimenopause and menopause experience has been like for me, and giving them permission to speak and making that space available.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I know I take a lot from this conversation, personally, but also workplace and how to deal with it at workplace, hopefully in whenever year's time it's going to come my way.
And I'll still be there.
And you'll still be
holding your hand through it, Natalie.
Exactly. Honestly, it's been fascinating. I think it's a topic that people need to talk about. I certainly want to talk about it more. Even with my husband, my children, boys, it's something you need to create that awareness.
You do.
For everyone.
You do. Because I am surrounded by, my house is full of men. I'm the only woman in my house apart from one of my cats. So, these are conversations because my husband didn't understand what was going on either, but he was getting the raw end of it for a long time. So was my son. My son's 16. He was getting the raw end of it for a while as well. So you do have to have these conversations. And actually, the conversation with a 16-year-old was easier because he's also going through his own hormonal challenges. So we're actually able to swap notes. And it did make that conversation much more understandable for him because he kind of got it, But you do need to have these conversations at home as well so that you get the support that you do need from home. Because I know my husband, God love him, I mean, for a period of time, he just thought I was a crazy lady. And I used to say to him, spend some time in my head for a while, because it's a really hard place to occupy. And we used to sit down and have some really, we're in a place now where it is a conversation. It's a really, really good one. So, so it is important. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for creating that awareness. Hopefully our listeners are going to get quite a bit of information out of that as well. And hopefully confidence to go and speak to whoever you need to speak to help you navigate through this. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Hope
Paula.
it's been helpful. Thank you.